You know, initially I was expecting that the next time we talk about Dynamis One, it'll be either when the company actually releases a game and we can look at how good that ends up being, or the company actually crumples under the weight of everything that has happened and collapses instead. Though it would seem that neither of those things happen, but it would seem that the ghosts of Kami's past have come back to haunt them, so here we are either way. Because yes, some of you have already mentioned it on the previous video as well, and I'm making this video now because some people were asking for an update as to what happened with the Dynamis One case so far. And I saw some comments there as well. I'm not going to name the people, of course, who mentioned some things that just weren't fully accurate of the case. So I'm guessing that there's some level of information out there that is not fully accurate, which is understandable, especially in the English-speaking space, since articles in Korean into English using any form of auto-translate tool, typically it tends to be a lot more iffy than with any other language. And thankfully, there are some people who know Korean around me, and there are people like the guy who made the initial document with the information on it as well, who left some of the information up there in English as well, which makes it a lot easier for people to read into it a little more if you're interested in all of that. So most of you probably already saw the news. On the 24th of February, Dynamis One was actually raided by the police, on top of several of their core members, including the CEO, having been charged with violating the Unfair Competition Prevention Act. This is due to Nexon contacting the Seoul Police Agency's Industrial Technology Security Investigation Unit. It's a very long name. Over the ex-Nexon staff members who went on to form Dynamis One, apparently leaking confidential information and using said confidential information in the development of their own titles in this new company that they have formed, including titles such as Project KV. For those of you who are wondering what went on with the whole Project KV thing, I've already made 2 videos on the topic. You can go watch those instead, so that we can keep this one a lot shorter, since it's just a quick update video while we wait for more concrete information to come out from the police. That said, the confidential information in question apparently relates to a title that was in development in Nexon around 2021 under the project code MX Blade, which some of the Dynamis One members were apparently involved in developing as well while they were still in Nexon. Just to make things clear, because there seemed to be some level of confusion in some of the comments I received a few days ago with regards to the topic of MX Blade, no, we do not have concrete evidence that MX Blade is meant to be a sequel to Blue Archive. The reporters from Korea who interviewed the people who talked about MX Blade also mentioned that the details of the project as well as when it got cancelled were both kept confidential, and so no information has come out on that. And the idea that the game is going to share themes or a worldview with Blue Archive is also something that is mostly a speculation, due to the fact that it had a similar project code to Blue Archive and it will be the next project to come after it had released. And MX Blade, as I said before, it's a project code, it's not the actual name of the game itself. That said, according to Nexon, in the process of investigating the data leak, they also came across circumstantial evidence that the core members who would then go on to form Dynamis One had apparently already premeditated some level of sabotage of Blue Archive in order to ensure the future success of their title. That said, there are some slight errors in some of the information that is being reported out there as well. For example, I saw something on Reddit about someone mentioning that the police reported that an anonymous source stated that the team leaders were gathering in workspaces after work and discussing their resignations and trying to pull people in to join them. That was not really specifically stated to be reported by the police. Rather, it was something that was divulged to the reporter by an anonymous source. The information, while mostly accurate to what some of the articles are saying, do have some very slight misconstruements, if that's even a word. Things such as the large gaps between the main story and the deterioration in quality of the story that some people were quite frustrated about as well. That wasn't so much a thing that the police has reported as fact as having been something that the people who left had sabotaged, but were things that the article had came to the conclusions of based off of all of the information that exists at hand. So while it is something that is written in the article, it is something that still has not yet been proven in a court of law, although the journalist does seem to think that there is a very high likelihood that it is true, based both off the information they possess as well as the information that is already out in the public. This also included the taking of extended vacations after announcing the mass resignations, which, to be fair, in a very normal situation, taking extended vacations after you announce that you're going to resign, it's very normal to like burn all of the additional leaves that you still may have left. But the big issue at this point is not so much the fact that they were taking the leaves, but more so the fact that, according to the article, they didn't actually perform the proper handovers of all the information as well as the plans that they had prior to actually taking all of these extended vacations, and they basically just left the company without a proper handover. For those who might think that the idea of a handover not being done well isn't that big a deal, after all, back in the past when I was working in a sex shop 10 years ago, all they ever handed over to me was a faulty dildo or something like that. It can actually get really bad, especially with like game development, or especially when you consider the fact that there were many core members of the team who actually did leave during this period, right? Considering the scale and the level of importance of some of the people who had left the company, if the whole handover thing is actually true, that can actually lead to very big issues for the team itself, as it can basically mean that there might actually be massive gaps in the amount of information that the team has, and that the remaining members of the team can then try to fill in. Because the thing with live service games is that typically the way you would design the game is that you would intentionally release characters who may not seem to be wholly very usable now, and then you would slowly, over the course of a long period of time, release more and more characters to help you form a team that will make it super viable and strong for the future content that might come as well. So individually, the characters now may not seem super strong, but because there is that long-term balance, it works out. So if that long-term balance is not properly communicated, and in the worst case, if only half the balance has been planned out, then the team would have to try to figure out how best to fill in the gaps with the rest of the content to try and match whatever content this team was meant to be very good against in the future. Which would then lead to more extra time lost because of the fact that they would then have to pick up the pieces, where if there was a proper handover, then at the very least they could easily work with what information they had on what the plans for the future were, which would then allow the remaining team members to be able to ensure that they can actually take all of this, the character design, the boss design, the stages themselves, and the difficulty that they intend to provide with these stages can all flow towards a natural conclusion, so that all of the content, all the characters that are released during the period do feel like they have a meaningful use within the environment itself, before the team can then move on to creating the balance for the next period as well as the future cycles of the balance to come. Or it might lead to issues with trying to develop new content for the team that has already been set into motion, because the team that they have already planned has already been released, but the content that they were supposed to be used in once the team was already formed simply just was not planned in the long-term schedule that was supposed to be handed over. And so now they have to try to work backwards to ensure that all of these characters can be used, or it might lead to actual player dissatisfaction with how they have basically been taken on an entire ride to basically roll for a bunch of characters that they're just simply not able to use, and that could just harm some of the goodwill that the team has with the players. In the worst case, especially when it comes to programmers, for example, this could actually lead to the game potentially become a black box. And when I say that, what I mean is that because all of the people who actually understand how the code works leave, and they don't hand over how the code is actually written properly with proper documentation, the people who are then supposed to take over this development may not actually have a full grasp of how the code works, and therefore it may make it a lot harder for them to add in new content going forward, because they just might be worried that if they were to change some very specific things within the code, it might cause the whole game to break down or break, which then leads to the game not being able to develop new content as robustly as it used to in the past as well. So a lot of things can go wrong with just poor handover, especially if lead members of the team are the ones who are not doing it. Although thankfully, from what we know from the initial case, it would seem that most of the programmers weren't really involved in this exodus. So on that end, we are less likely to see an issue. But when it comes to the design of like the character skills, for example, the new content that come in the future, some of it might just feel more like it gels less, and may feel more dissatisfactory simply because the goals that the person who initially came up with all of this may not have been the same as that of the people who then had to pick up the pieces of what these people had already developed and trying to fit that into a completely different direction from what those people may have designed those with a plan for. And if the whole allegation of sabotage is actually true, then these people may have very well done all of this without a long-term angle in mind, which may actually leave the team in some level of a dead end, trying to literally have to think up things from scratch to make sense of what content has already been released up till this point, which can then cause the game to, for a period of time, feel like its content just isn't meshing as well as it used to in the past, simply because there was no real design goal in mind when these things were developed, and so trying to find a use case for all of these things later on causes it to feel a little forced at points. That said, if they're actually found guilty of committing the sabotage or the leaking of the confidential information, the members of Dynamis One who have been charged with all of this could actually face criminal charges under the Unfair Competition Protection Act, and could also face civil charges on top of that. So things can actually get very bad and could actually harm the company itself in a very massive way. According to reporters though, thankfully both parties seem to be aware of the severity of the situation at hand and are cooperating with the police, who are in the process of processing all of this information. Though it was also noted that 2 days after the raid happened, apparently Dynamis One put out 2 job listings for both a technical artist as well as a new project manager who was fluent in Japanese, so it would seem that they seem to be taking this entire thing quite in stride. At the very least, it seems like they don't think that they are gonna really lose this if they're still trying to hire people in. And it does seem like they're still planning to target the Japanese market in some form in the future as well. As of the 27th of February, it would seem that they still had around 39 employees in the company. So it's not a very massive number, very lacking, especially if they are trying to develop a mobile game. Nowadays, with many of the mobile games out there, especially with the levels to which standards have risen with what all of the Chinese games have been doing as well, you typically expect a team maybe even double or triple that size at minimum. And unless they're planning to outsource a fair amount of it, this still does seem like a very small staff count to try and build a title that would exist in what is arguably the genre or space that is more popular within Korea as well. Now, needless to say, the results of the police investigation aren't fully out at this point. I'm not sure how long that's even gonna take, so I'm just putting out this initial update video for the people who are interested, as well as to just quickly go over some of the misconceptions that are out there while we're waiting for more information to come out. Right, so I'm just laying out all of the information that exists so far while trying to add a little more information and explanation to some of the things for the people who don't really want to read the document because they think that reading is for cavemen, and who thankfully at the same time have not reached the point where they need a Family Guy funniest video on the side of the video for them to be able to pay attention, right? You people who are just perfectly in the middle and very epic in a way. Now, people who have a very bad impression of Nexon to begin with are already pointing out how to them this seems a lot like the case of Dark and Darker, wherein Nexon is basically using exploits within the police system within Korea to basically send the police force to investigate and suppress or cause trouble for their competitors that they really do not like. And this might be some form of attempt to basically drive the nail into the coffin with Dynamis One because of all of the issues that had arisen last year. Meanwhile, for people who have a really bad impression on Dynamis One, they're already pointing to how a lot of the information that's coming out now seems to be corroborating a lot of what was being alleged at the time from like many anonymous sources, and about how things have been going on within Nexon prior to these members who left for Dynamis One actually packing up and leaving for it. And this is all just them catching up to the consequences of their action instead. People within Dynamis One, once again, seem to be keeping really silent about all of this. Like, I checked their website, I checked their social media. So far, they haven't put up really very much information at all anywhere about all of this. So a lot like the initial controversy, there's not a lot coming out from their side to try and justify anything that has happened so far, that, or try and like prove that they haven't done anything wrong. So things don't look the best for them. Again, it really feels like they really need to hire a PR person more than a PM for the Japanese side at this point, because it really feels like they just keep stepping into rakes when it comes to the whole court of public opinion with this case in particular. Like, there are actually people who have speculated a lot, especially among the reporters as well, that had they actually handled the PR for this whole thing a lot better, it could very well have been the case that they could have actually had a much more positive initial public perception, a lot like with Dark and Darker, that might have actually helped to at least lend them some level of protection from the backlash from Nexon to some extent as well. So shit's wild. We're only in the, well, I mean, we're already in March of this month, but if there's any substantial update to the case in the future, maybe we'll talk about it then. But for now, this seems to be most of the information that is presently out there. So I'll just leave this video here, leave it as a very short one, so that the people who need the Family Guy funnies on the side of the video might actually still click on it because of the fact that it's a little shorter than the usual. But that's it. That's all for me for today. Thank you all for watching. If you want to catch up with what has happened with the case since the time of the controversy. Stella Solaris, who created the initial document, which basically documented everything that has been happening since the start of the controversy till now, is still updating their document as consistently as they can, it seems. So you can go give them a check out for that. I'll put the link to the document below once again. And thank you to the people who helped to back the channels. Thanks to you guys that I can continue to make videos to the scale that I do, like over the past few years, especially since yeah, as much as I love doing all of this, shit gets expensive sometimes. Thankfully, it should get a little better with the cost of stuff, just a little bit, once the fucking stupid Adobe like contract actually ends, so that I can cancel all of that, because yeah, I signed a 1-year contract, and that's a little apparently canceling that midway is gonna cause them to backcharge me the remainder of the contract. So I'm just waiting for that to time out, and then finally we can be at peace and spend less on all of this nonsense. And thank you to everyone else who even just watches the videos in the first place, since you guys watching, commenting, and just like saying hi, or just saying like you look fucking old, all of that helps to fuel my demented mind into making more videos either way. So thank you all once again, and I'll be seeing you all in the next one, which should be the 5k sub celebration video. For those who are interested in that, it should coming next week, hopefully. So until then, I'll be heading off for now. So take care, and bye-bye.